I worked for the Kims, that was their name, and they were a husband and wife. They were great, I love them. They owned their own grocery store. Now, the grocery store was directly next door to a bank. The bank next door was robbed maybe every 2 or 3 months, and I'm stepping on the garbage in the dumpster like I would always do. But it sounded like it could have been a gunshot, but like a muffled one. And I just couldn't stop thinking about the guy in the alley and the way he looked at me for those 2 seconds. I don't know if I'm gonna survive the next one, and it just didn't look good for him. So I started to get this sick feeling in my stomach, like somehow I knew it could be him. And I start getting that clammy feeling, you know, that you get around your neck and your forehead. Now the detective has a shocked look on his face. My blood ran completely cold because the shooter wasn't the only person I recognized in that photo. Growing up in Brooklyn, you see some really messed up shit. These stories have haunted me for over 50 years. Now it's time to tell them. My one rule, I don't name names. These are the Brooklyn Files, the real stories. In the mid-1980s, Brooklyn was struggling with a massive spike in all forms of robbery. One of those forms was bank holdups. Bank heists in Brooklyn often tended to happen in neighborhoods that had quick access to major arteries like the BQE or the Bell Parkway, and of course that gave the robbers an easier getaway to freedom. So any bank that was situated just a few blocks from any one of these escape routes was always very susceptible to being hit, making them a major target for robberies, and so it happened often. In the mid-1980s, bank robberies in New York City were so common it rarely made the front page unless there was a shootout or a massive haul involved. I mean, otherwise it mostly went unnoticed beyond the immediate neighborhood or a small article that was buried several pages back in the paper. In modern times, bank robberies have now plummeted like 90%, mostly because of better surveillance tech and because banks don't carry that much cash anymore. Now, during the mid-1980s in New York City, the average haul for a bank robbery usually ranged between $2,000 and $5,000. Now, today with inflation, that would be more like $6,000 to $14,000. The most common type of hit in the 80s was called a note job. A lone person would walk up to a teller, hand over a note, and they usually got what was in that single teller's drawer, which wasn't always a lot of money. In situations like this, tellers would actually hand over bait money too, and then a small amount of cash just to get that person out of the building quickly. And in this time frame, there were a couple of ways a teller could notify the police silently that there was a robbery in progress. And so you had the teller's cash drawer, which would have a single stack of bills held in this like specialized clip, and when the teller pulled that stack out to hand it to the robber, it completed an electrical circuit that sent an immediate signal to the security company who would then call the police. There was also a foot rail. It was a metal bar that ran along the floor under the counter. The teller could then hook their toe under the rail, lift it up to trigger the alarm while keeping their hands in sight, and they would perform a tactical arrival, silently mounting the sidewalk or positioning cars to block the front doors and alleys before the robber even knew the police had been called. It was a quick move, and it was quiet. And there's a reason I know this, because I witnessed it several times a year when I worked in the grocery store in Bensonhurst for the Koreans. So it was spring of 1987, I was 17 years old. I worked for the Kims, that was their name, and they were a husband and wife. They were great, I love them. They owned their own grocery store, and they were almost like a second family to me. I had originally worked for them at a different location when they were partnering in owning half of a grocery store with another couple. But when they bought their own store outright, they asked me to come work for them, and I didn't hesitate because I really liked them a lot. They treated me well. And so I delivered groceries for them. Now, the grocery store was directly next door to a bank, which was on the corner. We shared a wall with this bank, but we also shared an alley with the bank. So the alley was where I would park the delivery van every evening after my deliveries were done. The bank next door was robbed maybe every 2 or 3 months the entire time that I worked at the store. So It was so common for me to just walk out in front of the grocery store, loading up my van and putting the groceries in, and I turn my head and suddenly see 5 or 6 police cars on the sidewalk, or like parked haphazardly in front of the bank, or like 2 facing the wrong direction, another one, directly on the corner, another one on the avenue. It was just this mess of police cars, and you would never hear them coming. It was kind of shocking, actually. Their arrival was silent. You would just turn around and they were there, that's it. It happened so frequently, in fact, that my boss, Kim, would just casually say with his accent, "Oh, I think the bank got robbed again," or something like that, and then just go about his business again. Like it was no big deal at all. The grocery store that I worked in also had a deli, so a lot of the bank employees would come into our place to order a sandwich around lunchtime. So we kind of got to know a few of them, and one of those people that worked in the bank next door was Marcus. Now, he was the bank security guard. Marcus was a really cool guy. Like, I really liked him. He would come in almost every day. He would joke around or make some kind of a comment about the weather or sports or whatever. Everybody liked him, but he would always make conversation when he was in there. Sometimes he would say something like, "I don't know how much longer I'm gonna keep this job with all the robberies we've been getting." Or he'd say something like, "I don't know if I'm gonna survive the next one." He said it like he was kind of joking, but at the time we didn't realize how ominous that statement would eventually be. Aside from delivering groceries, one of the things that Kim would have me do was throw out the garbage every day. So sometimes I had to physically jump in the dumpster out back in the alley to make sure everything fit, because we had so much garbage that day and we could only fit so much. So I would get a milk crate, stand on it, and I'd climb into the dumpster. So one day I was out there in the alley and I'm stepping on the garbage in the dumpster like I would always do. And the alley that we shared with the bank was short. It was a little one. And it didn't go the entire length of the block. In fact, it only ran behind the grocery store and the bank itself. So it maybe only stretched about 100 feet long or so. And then you had the opening at the end, which fed into the side street. And I'm out there all by myself, and all of a sudden, I hear a pop sound. I couldn't identify it at first, but it sounded like it could have been a gunshot, but like a muffled one. There was no big echo that you would hear if it came from outside in the street. It sounded like it came from indoors somewhere. So I immediately froze. I got freaked out, and I just kept listening. And maybe a few seconds later, the back door of the bank opens. It was a really heavy door, so it was noisy, and it sounded like it was equipped with one of those panic bars, that's on the door. One of those bars that you push really hard, and the door opens outward. As soon as I hear that sound, I look over, and I see this skinny guy, about 5'9". He clearly doesn't see me at first because he takes off his ski mask that he was wearing. And then he turns and notices me. He looks a little shocked. He's wearing all gray, he has a bag in his hands, and he's holding a gun. I'm in the alley, I hear this pop, I turn around, there's this guy coming out of the bank's fire exit. He's wearing all gray, he's holding a gun. Nobody was supposed to be there when he came out of the bank, it was obvious. That was supposed to be his chance to exit the bank unseen, take off the mask, nobody would be able to identify him, and then he'd just get away. But instead, we locked eyes for about 2 seconds. He quickly turns his back to me and he starts hightailing it out of the alley. So he immediately turns right up the residential street and he's gone. I honestly didn't know what to do, so I froze for about 10 full seconds or so, and I just waited. It was only about maybe a minute later that I could see cop cars coming up the street the opposite direction that he ran, and they're passing the alley, and then I start to hear tires screeching as if more of them are pulling up to the front of the bank. So I jump out of the dumpster, I run to the end of the alley, I look over to the left, and sure enough, there's about 5 cop cars jammed up in front of the bank. And I didn't want to get too close to the scene because obviously it was an active crime scene, but I did start to make my way towards the front of the bank from the alley because I wanted to see what was going on. And they had the doors propped open, a few people started gathering. I could start hearing whimpering coming from the lobby of the bank, and I could see cops standing in the doorway, and there's this growing commotion. And then just a couple of minutes later, I could hear this approaching ambulance. Someone had been shot. It became very obvious quickly that that was a gunshot that I'd heard. My heart sank as I thought about the people that we knew from the bank that we would see every day as customers in our store. So I began to worry about who it could have been, and I start going through my memory, thinking about all the people that we kind of knew that worked at the bank. Even if it wasn't any of those people, my heart just felt so bad for whoever had been minding their own business and may have been shot. It was just awful. And I just assumed someone was injured since I did hear the gunshot and now I heard an ambulance. It was just 2 and 2, when I put it together. The crying female voice almost confirmed it for me too. I was really heartbroken thinking that somebody innocent had gotten hurt, or worse. This bank had been robbed so many times, but we never heard a pop coming from inside, so this was much different. This felt different. This one hit home. So I'm standing there, tucked back, as this crowd is beginning to form in front of the bank, and I'm just watching as the New York City EMS finally pull up. I stayed back, but I couldn't take my eyes off that propped open door of the bank. And then I started to think about one person, and he came to mind. And my blood ran cold, and I thought of Marcus, the security guard. Marcus was the one I saw the most. He was the guy who walked into our place every day, and he always said that he was afraid, to keep working there at the bank. So I started to get this sick feeling in my stomach, like somehow I knew it could be him. The next few moments started to feel like a dream, like it just felt like an out-of-body experience, but not a good one. The EMTs came out with a stretcher, and they were moving fast. And in Brooklyn, when they move that fast, it usually means the situation's pretty grave. And then I saw it, the blue uniform on the stretcher. I just caught this glimpse, like in the space between the people that were standing in front of me, I could see like a shoulder go by. My heart absolutely sank. But the way the other cops were standing around, some of them with their hats off, other ones staring at the pavement, there was just this somber vibe among them. You just kind of knew. The female voice I heard crying earlier, that ended up being one of the tellers, and she was hysterical. And that's what really broke my heart, to be honest. Like a really cool guy that I talked to every single day was being loaded in the back of an ambulance, and it just didn't look good for him. I didn't even realize I'd been crying until I felt a tear fall down my cheek, and that really sort of popped me out of the trance that I was in. Like it really woke me up. And I just kept thinking, I saw him. I saw the guy who did that, and he saw me. And after they loaded Marcus into the ambulance and drove away, the scene didn't just go back to normal. A situation as serious as that, where a person gets shot, turns the whole block into a virtual crime scene. So the whole area is crawling with police. They begin stringing up the yellow tape, closing off the sidewalk, closing down the bank. And I just couldn't stop thinking about the guy in the alley and the way he looked at me for those 2 seconds. So a little while later, some plainclothes detectives, they start walking into the grocery store, and they're going into every business on the block, one by one, asking the same questions. Things like, did you see anybody running? Did you hear the shot? Did you see anybody going into the bank before it happened? When they finally get to me, I wanted to tell them I saw the guy come out of the back door and I saw his face, but I didn't. I guess I was just programmed from a young age. When you're growing up in Brooklyn, you're taught that being a witness could become a very dangerous thing, so you just don't do it. And I just kept thinking about the look that guy gave me in the alley. He knew that I saw him. If I told the cops and the guy was still out there on the street, what was stopping him from coming back to the grocery store for me? So I didn't say anything. But let me assure you, as soon as the detectives walked out the door, I felt sick. I felt like I'd betrayed Marcus. I felt like I'd completely failed him. I felt like I completely failed everybody that was in that bank involved in that terrible situation. Marcus was a guy who was friendly to me every day, and here I was, staying silent while the guy who shot him was getting away. I felt terrible. For the next few days, I didn't sleep. I stayed quiet for maybe a total of about a week, but the guilt, it eventually started building and building until it became worse than the fear. I finally realized that staying silent wasn't gonna make me safe. It was just gonna make me an accomplice to what happened to my friend. I finally decided that I was gonna go tell my side of the story and hopefully help the detectives figure out who did this to Marcus and hopefully catch him. So without telling my boss or anyone else, I drove the 5 or 6 blocks or so to the local precinct after work. Like, you gotta know that I'm literally shaking as I'm walking through the police station door. Like, every part of my body knew that I was about to do something that was gonna change the course of the entire investigation. It was a big deal, and I knew it. So I walked up to the person behind the big desk. I think it was like the desk sergeant or something like that. And I told him I had information about the robbery at the bank last week where the security guard was killed. And the police officer didn't say much. He just picked up a phone, made a quick call, and he told me to take a seat on the wooden bench. And so I sat there for like 20 minutes, staring at the floor, just listening to the phones ringing and the sound of business going on around me in this police station. And every part of me just wanted to run out of there and just forget about it. I'm like, you know, if I just disappear, maybe they'll forget about it. But I knew that I was there for the right reason. And I knew that I was doing the right thing. But my nerves were definitely shot at this point. Finally, a guy in a suit who looked like a detective, he walks out, calls my name, and he leads me into a back room. And the room just looked dingy and gray and stuck in the 60s. And he sits me down and asks me to go over the entire story. So I told him about the dumpster and the muffled pop that I heard and the heavy door swinging open in the alley. And he's taking notes. And I start describing the guy. I say thin, mustache, maybe 30 years old, 5'9" or so. And I told him about the way we locked eyes. And then he reaches down and he pulls 2 thick black binders out. And they were mugshot books. So he clears a spot on the cluttered desk, pushes the first binder towards me, and he says, look through this, take your time. He says, start from the beginning. If you see him, let me know. If you're not sure, tell me that too, or something like that. And he said, we've got hundreds of faces in here that fit that general description, so just pay attention, take your time. So I opened the first page, and it was rows and rows of faces. I started flipping through them one by one, and I'm looking for those specific eyes and that thin mustache. And after about maybe 10, 15 minutes of looking at nothing but black and white photos of strangers, I mean, they all started looking alike, you know? Like, your brain starts to play tricks on you, and the faces all start to blend together. It's sick. So by now, the detective's phone rings, and he stands up to take the call, and he leaves the room, and he leaves me alone with the books. I was just flipping through the pages, but nothing was jumping out at me at all. It was right about then that my eyes started to wander away from the mugshots, and I start to focus more on the clutter on the detective's desk. And that's when I see this color photo. It's sticking out from under one of those, desk pads that was on his desk. And it wasn't a photo from one of the black binders. It was like one of those typical 4x6 prints, like something you would just get developed at a pharmacy. And I lean in just a few inches to get a better look. And my heart didn't just skip a beat. It felt like it actually stopped. And I start getting that clammy feeling, that you get around your neck and your forehead. And right there in the photo, standing under a tree at what looked like a family barbecue, was the guy from the alley. Same thin mustache, same cold eyes. He's wearing a polo shirt, but there was no doubt about it. It was him in this photo. But then I looked at the person standing right next to him, the person he had his arm around. My blood ran completely cold because the shooter wasn't the only person I recognized in that photo. I'm staring at this 4x6 print on the detective's desk, and just then the detective hangs up the phone, comes back in the room, turns his chair back around facing me. He sees me staring at the photo, right? But before I could even tell him that the shooter is right there in that photo, he starts telling me, he says something like, that was taken last summer, that's Marcus and his brother, Anthony. And the room felt like it was shrinking. I looked at the photo again. It was Marcus, and right next to him was the man who had just ended his life a week ago. It was his brother who pulled the trigger. I just sat there in shock. I could barely form words. I didn't know what to say. The detective then asks me, he says, "You okay?" And I finally look up at him, and my voice is just shaking at this point. And I pointed at the guy in the polo shirt and I said, "That's him. That's the guy from the alley. That's the guy who shot Marcus." Now the detective has a shocked look on his face, which I would have thought would have been impossible, but he had one. And then he leans forward into me and he says, "Are you 100% sure?" And I told him I was positive that was him. Then they moved me into a different room after that. They brought in more detectives. Then they had me sign a couple of statements. They told me not to go back to the grocery store for a while till they could make an arrest. I mean, they were worried about retaliation. It turned out the brother had a huge gambling debt and thought the bank would be an easy score, and I guess he thought Marcus would just step aside if he knew it was him. He didn't expect his own brother to do his job that day, but he did. Or maybe he just figured Marcus wouldn't have recognized him with the ski mask. Either way, I walked out of that precinct about 2 hours later into the evening air. I felt lighter because I told the truth, but I felt older too, like something profound had just happened to me. I went from being a kid delivering groceries to witnessing a capital murder case involving a brother killing a brother. A story as old as the first book in the Bible, the story of Cain and Abel. Marcus was gone, but at least he wasn't just another unsolved statistic in Brooklyn. I did what I had to do, but I quit that job a few months later. I just couldn't stand looking at that back door in the alley every day, knowing what evil came out of it.